Yeah.
All right, so I think I'm recording. Hello, everyone. February 22nd, 2021, still in the lockdown. My old friend Brian, my Canadian friend, and we met in Vancouver a while back. Now he's back with a vengeance, and he has a lot of great breakthroughs. I'm super excited to talk with Brian about his things. We kind of just chatted shortly before this. I started recording about the current state, the impasse we're all feeling. Like, keep going in circles. There's all these millions of frameworks, and just rediscovering the wheel. Um, Brian has a beautiful poster behind him, picture there, which I love, which is the incremental versus iterative, which is my favorite topic, and we can chat about that. But Brian, I would love to like to ask you because I was following your begin and we had few chats and my big passion is immediacy. I like immediate feedback.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
upset
Yeah.
about the latency. And people know me, you I make some diff and then I have to wait for how long till I see whether it broke something, whether it's working, whether or not. So I know you made some really brilliant work with your begin and you're like I was impressed with your stats. So why don't you maybe tell us a little bit more about that and we can branch into other discussion.
Yeah, I share this obsession. I think it's a very healthy developer obsession to have a really critical eye over your iteration speed. And this is tricky because I think people talk about speed all the time. They're not very empirical about it. And so, what's fast to one person is very relative to another person. And you can never really truly pin this one down, and so it's very hard to get like exact. Like a fast Java build, might be minutes, could be hours, um, and then a fast, I don't know, front end website build could be the same thing. But what's truly fast is like how quick you can realize, where you made a mistake, so you can fix that mistake and move on to the next thing. And this is the big issue for me is like it's lead time to production, but it's also mean time to recovery. And these are two nerdy stats that kind of came out of the DORA report, the state of DevOps report. So there's 6 years of science by PhDs that back this up. The shorter your iteration cycles, the more iterations you get. And the more iterations you get, um, more chance that you're going to leave home at 5, more chance you're going to find product market fit, more chance you're going to fix that bug. And so it's all about not necessarily about like eliminating, but about minimizing how much work you're doing about the work and how much you can focus on whatever it is your unique value is. And for me, the web especially has become and I think this is normal by the way, but it's become a complexity for a magnet for complexity. And a lot of, especially more junior developers will, rather than trying to clearly define a problem, and have a close understanding of what the minimum first, simple version could be, they'll just start installing stuff, start adding like as many logos as they can to the problem before they've even begun to solve it. And this quickly spirals out of control, and no one can really remember why they installed that thing. But if they remove it, it might break something, or could, maybe we'll need it in the future. Is an excuse I hear very often. And the sort of driver for me has been, how do I get my own personal, like, screw everybody else, just put them out of your mind right now, and be a self-interested, 100% self-interested individual. And how can I make my speed the fastest? How can I get like down to effectively zero? And that led me in a whole bunch of really weird directions. One of those places was this serverless tech, and I didn't get into it because I was excited about a logo or the buzzword. For me, the thing was that I would run a deploy, which was effectively uploading a zip file, and then the next execution, that was the runtime. And so with Begin and Architect, the open source stuff I'm working on, we regularly will see a full deployment cycle to production take between 7 and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's with like 400 lambdas doing real-time stuff. They're connected to sockets, they're processing data, they're fully live with thousands of users. And yeah, we have no latency between us and production. So it's possible. And that deploy is actually still too long for me even still. So we've spent a ton of time getting our local development environment to at least somewhat of a facsimile. Now you can't mock the cloud semantics. I'm never going to have the throughput that S3 has on my local machine, but I also don't need to, right? Like if I'm loading a font, locally, then good, it's going to load on S3 even better. And sometimes people will argue, well, you can't mock out the whole cloud, and that's bullshit. Of course you can. When we first started doing mobile stuff with PhoneGap, people used to say you would never emulate a mobile device. And here we are, 10 years later, we're emulating iOS and Android no problem on a desktop. So this isn't a matter of if, it's kind of a matter of when. And that's why we've put the time into it, because we know we can be that commodification push. And when you've got a local development environment that at least mocks out the APIs of the cloud that you're using, now your iteration speed is as fast as you can start your local environment, which hopefully should be, milliseconds, not even full seconds. And when you embrace the stateless world, this all becomes possible, but there's like a whole bunch of big paradigm shifts that have to take place before this seems as profound as it is. A lot of the people that are really excited in our stuff have suffered the right way of doing things. So we have plenty of customers from Begin who built the load balance monolith with Kubernetes and Rails and scaled it and sharded their database, only to discover that they had iteration speed measured in minutes and hours. And as a startup, that is not an advantageous place to be. You want to be in the place where you can squeak as many iterations as possible in a day. And it's hard to know. There's no real points for getting it right out of the box. And so it's difficult to understand, what the benefits are of taking these approaches if you haven't suffered the pain of doing it kind of the wrong way. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, but
that's great. That's great. So I don't know, in your journey, if you had the chance to make a stopover, one of my favorite guys is Kent Beck.
Yeah.
And he's fascinating because he got one morning, he woke up and he says, what if, because he was working in Facebook, I think, and he started noticing that they're hiring hordes of developers, like just pumping them in. And then he was like, okay, so the way this is going, we may be having 100,000 devs working. And then he says, all right, so what are the logistical challenges? And one of the things that we all share, I'm big on that, the frustration with code as text. I don't like code as text. I think it's phenomenally primitive. And I don't know how we got into this fascination with code as text. It's really mystifying to me because I like immediacy. And code immediately conveys latency because machines don't understand text, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to have intermediary and blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, this is bullshit. This is just like getting on my nerves. I don't know if you looked into Prune. Ken Beck was working on the Prune editor. Have you looked into that?
No, I haven't, but I love this man's work, and I've definitely followed
So
a
he
lot of
built
his
Prune.
thinking.
Because I think in Facebook you get how does it go? Once you make one full year of like you're staying on the team and they love you, you get 1 month to just dick around. Just one paid month, just go nuts, right? And he went nuts and he built Prune with another guy. What Prune is a direct abstract tree, syntax tree manipulation.
Okay.
So he came up, he said, okay, we were just really scrambling. This was just like, brainstorming. But he says, 100 commands does it all. And he says, I know we can crunch it down to less than 100. But he says, with 100 commands, I'm in a position that I'm manipulating the abstract AST, right? And I can just code, right? And in his mind, and then he started doing another system, which he calls Limbo. How low can you go?
So, it's sounding very lispy to me.
Yeah.
It sounds very...
It's all about this immediacy. You're right there, touching the nerve, and you're going for it, right? And no, please don't give me any like layers of shit and building and blah, 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 and pipelines and crap. I don't want that, right? This is just like Mickey Mouse. It's not professional.
I'm trying to remember who said it. There's a really good old quote, and someone can probably look it up, but We build our programs the way we build our cities, on top of the ruins without any plan.
That is,
This is what we're doing. We're just
that is,
dog piling our problems.
and it's all crutches and wheelchairs, and but when we step back, and that's when I'm talking to guys like you. I think we should step back and rethink the whole deal. Like, okay, let's just reset. Like, why are we here? Obviously, we're here because of Intel in 1974 released their first CPU, right? And that sealed our destiny. But before CPU, we had mass computing, right? You probably remember that in the 60s, where we had just PUs, no C, no central.
Right.
It's just like a network of processing units,
Yeah.
and it's called mass computing, and it's brilliant because you can sort, you can have like terabytes, petabytes of data coming at you, and it's sorting as it's coming in, right? Um, why didn't it take uh, hold? Because astronomical cost at that point. Like hardware
Too
was
early,
expensive, right?
probably. Just too early.
And
And now
too early.
commute's
And then,
cheap.
yeah, Intel comes with CPU, Moore's law. Every say 18 months, it doubles in speed. All of a sudden, free ride. Hey, everybody jumps on the bandwagon. Here we are, right? But that's, I
And
think
our
that's one.
software didn't get faster, and we made it worse with that extra headroom, if you think about it.
Plus, another thing that really boggles my mind, which you touched upon, I, I'm teaching a lot, and I'm trying to, and I'm meeting phenomenal resistance anytime I propose virtualization simulation. No, we have to touch the real thing.
Interesting.
I'm like, if you buy a smoke detector and install, you test it by setting your house on fire. Is that how you test it? That's how
Yeah.
everything has to be real. You have to touch the real thing. Only then you know it's tested. I'm like, guys, we are people are simulating flights to Mars.
Well, yeah, and this is, yeah, the mocking thing and the emulator thing for me is pretty important because I think the develop like, first of all, you can mock APIs. Amazon's not changing their
Yeah.
APIs pretty much ever, actually. Most of S3 has been stable for 15 years now.
Yeah.
So like, you're pretty good if you implement, because they don't want to break people either. As soon as if they break someone, that person's going to evaluate switching to a different vendor. So they just don't break anything ever. That's part of their deal. iOS and Android were a little bit more moving targets, but eventually they also calcified into pretty emulatable environments. So it makes sense to me that this is part of the cycle. It also makes sense to me that people are resistant. I see this just about every day. There is somebody who is absolutely convinced that what we're doing is not only wrong but offensive. It's like new, and that is basically the like entirety of their thesis. Why? And they'll see it and they'll be like, you can't do it that way, and it'll be like, well, but I actually am, like, right now, for real, with
I
like
know.
actual like, you can do it that way, and like it's disturbing, right? Like if you see something new, you probably react the way I do. You're like, that's interesting, I'm curious. Most people see something new and they're like, that's scary, I haven't seen that before.
I know. But I mean, we tend to model a lot of our activities to our older siblings, for example, architecture and engineering, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
we pick and choose because all these other older disciplines, they all are based on simulation. They all are based on pretending that something's there, right? And yet in software, no. When I say, guys, let's pretend we already have this, no, we can't. Like, why not?
I also find some of my best work comes from doing my shittiest early abstractions. So like some of my most fruitful attempts have been doing the unintuitive abstraction. And I've got some pretty good recent examples. Like, um, we have the local cloud emulation there. That's pretty batshit crazy. Except for it isn't. Once you start using it, you're like, whoa, I'm way faster. Now I don't have to wait for a bunch of, infra. I can just do that locally. We maybe embarked on the like inadvisable journey of trying to do our own dialect slash language slash schema for our configuration. And people get really mad about that. And they'll be like, why would you reinvent configuration? That's been solved. And I'm like, really? By who? Like, you can't tell me it's YAML. If you're off by one space, you have a semantically valid document that is still going to blow up my infra, and you don't want infra blowing up. If you got that one space off, you might drop a database table, and that's a bad day. So YAML has room to improve, to say the least. JSON's not it's supposed to be human readable. I'd argue it's worse. There's no comments.
Well,
You look at XML, is it verbose? Sure, I guess it's verbose. And so like
this
we
is
ended up doing our own thing. And like nobody wants to approach from a first principles of like, hey, there's prior art. There's good things to learn from that prior art. My hypothesis isn't that it, is impossible to improve upon things. My hypothesis is that in fact it is possible to improve on things
yeah,
and grow and make things better. Um, but some people are scared of change, and
yeah.
which is a really weird choice of job. If you got into software and you're scared of change,
It's
that's nuts.
shocking. It's shocking because you meet all these like more hard, what's the word, hard physics or hard engineers and stuff, and they're so playful and they're so open to like trying weird shit. And here we are supposed to be the most creative, and we are stuck in a little like cargo.
Yeah, and I love it when I find out I'm wrong. Like that's great.
Yeah,
That's rare information that's useful that I can apply. And like I don't want to assume that I have all the answers because then that means I've got nothing left to learn.
yeah.
Um, that would be even more depressing.
But you see,
Um,
what's exciting to me is like if you look at if you go back in the past, and when the technology was just primitive, what we were doing back then is we were exploring the physical world, and then we were mapping it. And so technology, the first we create, you can
totally.
measure, you map. So you start from the physical, tangible, concrete, and then you map it. But what's happening today? We create maps, and then we create the world from the maps. Right? This is what's we turn things on its head. So that's what's beautiful about our professions. You can dream a world, and then you can make it real. Right?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's funny how so many of the metaphors are very persistent too. Like you see it from the save icon with a floppy disk. That makes no sense to millennials or Zoomers. Like they have no idea what that is. You see it, frankly, to me, like a server makes sense, right? That's a good idea. We plug that in, and when I need like more bandwidth, I plug in more of them. But like, actually, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I model that abstraction at all? That has nothing to do with my customer. My customer is interested in like, their business domain, and their business domain doesn't involve servers. So why am I bringing that into the party? And it's a tough question to ask because we've been bringing it to the party the whole damn time. So now it's like, oh, you're going to tell me to uninvite the server? Like that's offensive. That's my friend. I've been working with them forever. It's hard to let go.
I know. And then another thing I find very frustrating when I'm learning and teaching and trying to help people get better is this in software, which is really weird. This phenomenal aversion to rework.
Yeah,
Like you can see teams who have maximum tolerance, like unexplainable tolerance to retries. Like you do something, you release, it blows up. Hey, do you mind trying again, right? And nobody has any. You can, but the moment they go into rework, right? Like no, we haven't. I'm not paying for that. We don't have time for that. Like
yeah. We yeah, I see this too. Or like it was a waste of time to I think it's a boundaries thing. It's like so setting up a thing as an experiment destined to like if it was positive or negative we throw it away and we the outcome is the knowledge as opposed to setting things up as like okay it's prototype implying that this is actually the app and like this prototype is really like how much longer is it going to take to get this production when it's like no the point is to find out if we should even do this thing
yeah,
like we even like does the customer like how do we know it's successful for the end use
yeah.
case.
But I mean, you probably remember. I remember we were going to school, and then they ask you to write an essay, and then they teach you. They teach you like, no, you have to have first draft, and just throw your thoughts on paper. And
Yep.
don't you think that this is it? It's not it. Now I have to go
Why?
rework, and I thought it was ingrained in people, but in software it just does not apply.
Yeah, it's funny, and we almost go straight to the last version first,
Yeah,
as opposed to starting with that first shitty
exactly.
draft.
the moment you lay your hands on keyboard and here's the first line of code and a few statements, that's it. Don't go back. Why are you touching it again? Well, I'm trying to refactor. Can't you do it right the first time? No, I can't. Well, I thought you were an expert.
Yeah, and no one does either. Like I would argue outside of like really well known domains, and even then there's stuff to uncover. You can't really know until you start seeing the thing in action,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever the thing is, and taking hopefully the most distilled single responsibility, smallest corner of the thing, and just proving that and getting that into production, and then worry about the next thing as opposed to starting with a whole bunch of solutions and a really fuzzy idea of the problem you're solving. Better to have like a really crisp idea of the problem you're solving, and frankly, non-attachment to your solutions is healthy because that's where your iteration speed's really going to come from. You got to be ready to throw that shit out and start over again, and take the win. If you learn that you were on a bad path, that wasn't that you lost time. Actually, you gained time. I say this to my team very often, but I want to walk briskly in the right direction. I do not want to run blindly in the wrong direction.
yeah.
Right? I'd rather have a good, consistent, regular pace where I'm like, hey, we've hit a milestone where we've realized that we can invalidate this hypothesis and throw this code out. That's a win. That's less code. That's less shit for me to manage. That's less stuff to deploy and maintain, and more focus for our core cases that we know are successful. Very hard to translate this back to code because it sounds like you know, this is business problems, but it's everybody's responsibility to be doing the right thing. And I think sometimes we still think that our job is to ship lines of code when our job is really to ideally ship value some form,
Yeah.
and that value might be realized by removing more lines of code than you add.
Right.
And yeah.
A lot of people late in their career or early, depending on who you are, you discover the joys of deleting code.
Oh, it's the best. It's the
It's
best feeling.
like playing Tetris, right? When you all the shit's lined up, so, right? Goes.
It's just like, yeah, it's like that's exactly the feeling where you're like, oh, I've got more room to
Like,
work
like
here. I can
taking a
fit
shower.
stuff in my head.
Yeah, you took a
There's
shower. Yeah, yeah. But
there's
when I talk about values, these things are very hard to sell, very hard to explain, and people are really raising their eyebrows. For example, right now, what I'm selling as a value, and it's not going well. I'm trying to, I'm trying to explain to people that the biggest value is interruptibility. Are you
oh,
interruptible? And like,
interesting.
why should that be a value? Isn't that like that's terrible? Like it's such a huge cost. And I'm like, I want to be as interruptible as humanly possible. I want to be capable of being interrupted every bloody second. Because if I set my mind right now, I think I know what I'm doing, and I take a leap. As I'm flying through the air, I'm not interruptible, and I'm missing so many opportunities to learn something because I'm just flying a straight arrow and I'm arrogant and I'm like, yeah, I got it made. I'm the dude, right? But when you land, you're like, oh shit, this is not doesn't look.
I really like this, and I've never heard it characterized this way. It's good because it's not intuitive. I
Yeah,
kind of talk about this with our
you know how it
team
came to
as
me. You know how it came to me. I was doing a lot of TDD, and then and I love TDD, and I'm teaching TDD. And then I started thinking because I'm a very impatient guy. I'm like, okay, this has been around for like more than 20 years. There's got to be something better than this. I'm like, no way, this is the holy grail. I'm like, there's got to be something better. And of course, I go to Mr. Kent back, and wouldn't you know it, the dude did he discover better shit than TDD. I was like, this guy's like something else, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm reading Kent back, and he's like, I don't know if you've heard of TCR.
no.
TCR. So he goes like, uh, TCR is this: you write a test.
Oh yeah, I've been following his Twitter threads on this commit and revert. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like so
Oh
this is
man, when you
this
try
is
that, huh?
yeah, well, so similar. For me, I like how some thoughts independently manifest in different ways. So I call this stuff replaceability, and so like rather than like kind of we'd say treat your servers like cattle, not pets,
Yeah,
and you want the stuff to be disposable. Well, I try and take that to the function level. So like everything is kind of up for grabs to be ripped out and can be at any time, ideally, and that's not always the case, but really clear points of coupling so that it's not an emotional investment to be like, oh, fuck this code path, get rid of it, or branch right there and do a
Yeah,
feature flag and make
exactly.
it really cheap to throw out code is
Yeah,
actually probably faster than fixing existing code.
exactly.
And
And
I
that,
like also like committing to that up front, being like, all right, I'm going to throw this out because the purpose of this is to learn something, which
yeah,
I
because it really,
like.
I'm doing TCR. It really, it's living on the edge for me, and it really puts you in
Mm,
this weird state of mind where you're any moment now, everything goes poof, up, God. I'm like, oh shit, okay, who cares? Let's try something else. So I'm really interruptible, and this is giving me
that's fascinating.
so many more opportunities to figure out something else. Because if I'm doing regular TDD, okay, I'm thinking about my test, and I'm doing fake it till you make it. First, I hard code. It's all like, to me, it's pedestrian. Tra la 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 la. Okay, bam bam, red, green, blah blah blah, right? And I'm
Yeah.
kind of complacent in my little comfort zone. And I'm thinking, this is not it, man. This is just like,
Well, the problem with it is that as that goes on, you become more attached, even implicitly, in the sunk cost of those previous tests.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you're like, well, this is the way because this is the way I started building it. And then like, whereas the other way is like, well, maybe I can take two roads at once.
yeah.
And
And
and with software, we can. Like, it's
yeah, yeah.
cheap to take two roads at once if we think about it up front.
Really, Brian, it's exhilarating. It's giving you the speed, right? And it's
Yeah,
something else, right? So what I'm saying is, it's so hard to sell to people. Leave yourself open to being interrupted at any point in time.
that's
Don't
so unintuitive.
under
Even like
completely. Everybody's like, no,
I
get out.
like it a lot because I need the focus spaces, and I've come to a point where I'm sort of weird about it, where I'm like, it's got to be dark. It's got to be like, I know that the calendar's not going to pop something. I can't have a meeting coming up afterwards because I'm going to be so exhausted when I'm done. And like, it's almost like I'm hoarding some special thing where it's like way too precious. And then if
I
I
know.
don't get my task done, I feel bad about it because I made all that time for it.
So now
And
you're a monastic. You went to the monastery, and this is your
yeah,
you're now in a jungle. You're
yeah.
in a jungle. You better keep your wits with open, right? Because jungle is jungle.
But I also wonder, like, this could be also a situational thing. Like maybe you want to follow a TCR type process, especially earliest in a project. Later on, like, there is something to be said for like pairing. It's another one that gets controversial. And like, I need to pair sometimes on gnarly old hunks of code because I need to rubber duck it with someone and go through it. Now, if that, and then you see the extreme where it's pivotal, where they apparently pair all day. To me, that's a nightmare. Like, I don't want that for all situations. I want that for definitely some, and I'll self-nominate. Be the first guy to be like, I need a pair on this thing. Um, there are times when I need to go heads down on a thing and have that focused time. There are times when I do need the collaborative. What do you think? What do I think? And then throw out a couple PRs. I really like the idea though of committing to actually throwing the thing away, like right from the beginning. I mean, like the purpose of this is to validate or invalidate a hypothesis, not. And it's very scientific that way. You don't feel as bought in.
Yeah, and you like you said, you learned that your code is not your pet.
Yeah, yeah,
Nothing
it's so important.
nothing pressure about that line you wrote. That's just disposable.
Yeah, and this one's tough. Programmers build their fiefdoms in their code, and especially bad if it becomes self-identifying because then it's not open to feedback that can be critical. And then they protect the fiefdom, and they maybe even recruit soldiers to stand on the walls of the fiefdom. And next thing you know, you've got a department for a feature, and
And
you're
then you
like
have
every other big company out there.
and then you meet the swamp guides, right? Like,
Yep.
don't go there, there are crocodiles over there, you know.
Yeah, totally, totally. And then now you've got these silos, so you better have a silo for QA. And now we're on to multi-day deployment cycles where there's guys throwing stuff over walls, and we're back to where we shouldn't be as organizations.
Yeah. But another transformational event for me was when I embraced mob programming. I don't know if you did mob programming.
No.
Amazing, amazing, soul searching. It is something special. I love it.
Yeah, my day has been oddly. I have grown almost militantly, probably monastically would actually be a good joke way of saying it, but like deep on a few pieces of tech that can get me what I need to get, and trying to not allow the noise into my world. I bet on JavaScript a long time ago, way maybe too early for even its good, but I feel mostly vindicated in that choice now, many years later. I spend almost exclusively my time in the AWS world as far as cloud goes, and that's enough. I don't need to go further than that to get done what I need to get done, which is generally build web apps. And yeah, I've experimented along the way with all sorts of different methodologies and approaches, and I've sort of found the place that fits right for me. But it's hard to cut through the noise, especially if you've picked AWS and JavaScript is your things, like it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that, the next answer is going to come around the corner in the form of some library that just came out 2 weeks ago. And there seems to be a new one every couple of weeks that everyone believes will be the solution. What people forget is like the cause of your problems was your previous solutions. And so if you minimize the number of solutions you have, basically the number of dependencies you have, the smaller the problem space that you'll have to solve for. And yeah, this complexity thing is weird because it ranges. I see it in the front end a lot. That's normal. It's always been complex up there. That's the highest level of abstraction. That's where people learn to get on board, and that's where the easiest bottoms up growth is. So they're targeted by a lot of developer tools. And so everybody's making the same claims loudly. I see it in the back end a lot too, though, like Docker complexity mixed in with deployment pipeline complexity mixed in with a false sense that you're going to get some kind of cross cloud solution running sometime. Like, it's never going to happen, but people try. They do it to their own peril because guess what your customer does not care about? They don't care if you're running Kubernetes. They don't care if you got React or Angular. Their customer just cares if their load or if their
Yeah,
request was satisfied quickly. That was
exactly.
about it.
I always keep telling people, like, look, when you order something from Amazon and it shows at your doorstep, you're really spending time wondering, like, what kind of truck were they driving? Were they like,
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter. It, maybe if it's all, came a month later and they're charging you $5,000, and like, okay, what's going on? But if it's within time and budget and it's in one piece, you'll forget about it the moment.
Well, in our lifetime, it'll probably be a drone at some point.
Yeah,
Might even be one of those Austin Boston dynamic cheetah bots, which I think would be really cool.
yeah,
I would notice then, but like, after the 100th package, you'd probably be like, oh, there goes cheetah bot.
yeah.
Fly.
I know. But recently I found, I forgot where did I find it. One guy sat down and says, "Okay, let's start from like blank slate and do Hello World in the most modern, like everything, full stack." And he
Oh
was
boy.
keeping track of all the installing shit and Kubernetes, and believe it or not, he came up with some like 90 days or something. Okay,
Yeah.
this like a
We
rigmarole of like,
I see it happen a lot. So we have a natural forcing function with Begin that our whole thing is CI for these future apps, and so we're doing it all with Lambda. And there is a big downside using Begin, and that's because it is using Lambda for CI. We have a temp disk that's 500 megs, and I can remember when we were prototyping it, I was like 500 megs. I mean, that's a lot of app. No one's going to run into this. People run into this daily.
yeah,
And the apps that they're running into it with usually are Hello World. And it blows my mind every time it happens. I'm just like, why did you install all this stuff? And they're like, well, I might need it. It's like, well, yeah, but you're just saying Hello World over the web. Like, all you needed was a text file called index.html for that. That's all you needed.
yeah.
but there's
And
a terabyte of depths blowing up my Lambda
I know.
function now. And
And, there was this kind of research in back in the 80s. I forgot the guy's name. He's the guy who invented "There is no silver bullet."
oh, Fred Brooks.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I read
I
about
got that.
it.
Oh, yeah, I got that on the shelf right there.
So I kind of, yeah, I, I kind of read about it and thinking about it, and I think his um, thesis is that there's this thing called accidental complexity,
Yeah.
which is killing us, right? And then I kind of tie that back into the Unix philosophy, where Unix is like do one thing well, and then you pipe them all together, right?
Yep.
And I blame Unix philosophy for the current state. I think that this is our bane of our existence. This kind of have millions of little things, put them all together, throw them in, and what do you get? You get accidental complexity.
Yeah. So
So
the trick is, how do you define essential complexity with such a broad set of use cases that computing has and is ever growing? And then the other aspect to this is there's like almost a weird Pokemon like collector attitude about like picking up as many solutions as possible so you've got this impressive toolbox, when in actuality all you need was a hammer and a planer and you could probably do 90% of the jobs. But we can't even agree if we're doing woodworking or metalsmithing or
yeah,
flat, or are we building cars, or are we building bridges. And it seems like to me that like if you're a general purpose programmer today, you're kind of being expected to do both in a sense. And if you take the building analogy even further, like if you're going to build a brand new house tomorrow, you'll have a general contractor, but that guy won't do the plumbing, the electrical. He won't, he'll hire out to professionals to do the foundation. He's roughly a project manager. And we kind of see specialization happening in our industry, but it's almost like to your advantage to be more generalist. And that's how we end up with a team building an iOS app, and a team building an Android app, and a team building a
yeah,
Windows app, and a team building a web app, and a team building the API, when it was like, oh my God, what does our business do again?
yeah,
Did we even need one of those things? And yeah, I have no good answers. I wonder if in the future we, like the trades, will have like our own unions and our own specializations and our own certifications to figure out, like I think we've seen that on a vendor level a few times and fail spectacularly, but like,
no,
you know,
it
we don't
must
want them certifying people because we know what they'll certify. Use their product. Like, that's what will
yeah,
happen.
exactly. I mean, I think everything should be like email, because email is not. I mean, if I send you an email, I don't care how you're gonna read it. Yeah, I know
Right.
you're gonna read it. I know you're gonna get it, and that's it. So everything else should be like that, right? I should never have to stop and think, okay, how's Brian gonna consume this functionality, right?
Yeah.
That
Well,
should be
we've
completely
lost
vendor
sight
neutral.
of, I agree completely. So like we've lost sight of protocols is the problem. Like we keep designing centralized APIs, and yet protocols from shit, I think like email and a lot of the web are from the 80s and 70s.
Yeah,
Now, I guess the web, we've now got HTTP 3, but the difference between that and 2 and 1 is a lot of branding, not a lot of actual like
and
concrete
you,
change to the end
you can
developer.
navigate to some website that was published in 1993 and it still works. Everything works.
Hmm.
There's no like, oh, it was deprecated. Sorry, blah blah blah.
Yeah, and well, unless there was some Flash on there, but we all saw
Yeah, but I
that
mean,
coming.
I
And
mean
I,
just
but I
vanilla.
think the same thing is happening now. I postulated this question, uh, and I think it's probably true. But I'm willing to bet that in 2035, you won't be able to compile a website written today,
Mm.
and you might be able to view that website's compiled output from today, but you will never be able to recompile it again. Because similar to Flash, our tool chains are kind of proprietary. And if they're not proprietary by like license, they're proprietary by complexity. You're not peeling back the layers of how React works. You just know it does. And each successive version you upgrade. But if you tried to upgrade a React app from 2014, bet it didn't go very well.
Yeah,
So now play that forward 15 years and tell me how that's going to go.
true,
It's,
true. But I mean, I remember
clear.
going, from what I know, going back into the 80s. And there was this guy, I think from MIT, Mitch Kapoor. I don't know if you heard of him.
Yeah, Kapur Capital,
Yeah.
and yeah,
And and I don't know why, he had this idea, which I love,
is
that
he a part of
part,
the Long Now? I think, or might be a part of that group.
I can't remember. But basically, his idea was also, why can't we have a calendar, which is like email? I send you a calendar. I don't care.
Why doesn't that fucking work yet?
Yeah, come on.
Like, come
This
on.
is my frustration. These things should be all.
Sumerians had a calendar. We've been doing calendars
How
since
come?
antiquity.
How come we have a nice, fully functional email, the first publishing platform ever, blah blah. Why can't I just send you a calendar? Why do I have to worry about, okay, are you using whatever iCal? Blah. This is a shame. This is a black eye in our industry, right? This shows how immature we are.
Well, it shows how immature we are. And I think, I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I do think governance does come into play at some point. It's a very tricky thing, obviously. Like, we don't want to invite, um, regulation that enshrines monopolies. And that's kind of what they're always talking about. Like, oh, we need to regulate Facebook. Is actually like, we need to make, them a utility, which that scares me because this is anti-competitive at its worst. This is like basically creating monopolies. Why like we don't have instead like a shared social protocol, like simple things like commenting, and people are like, well, moderation's hard. Yeah, it's hard. Not even Facebook can do it, but like, we got to figure it out. And if it was all controlled by me, it makes more sense to me that we can do that. But I think it's a maturity thing. I think it might also be downstream of this constant sort of decentralized, re-centralized, and we're definitely on a centralizing push at the moment. Um, I think with cloud computing and all that, it's moving in this kind of centralized world. Maybe it'll unbundle.
But the
I
fear
don't know.
is, the fear is real that it's going to become debilitating. What I would like to see, and I don't mind if it's centralized, is more on the punitive side, not on the, like you build your shit however you want and blah, blah. But when you fuck up, you go to jail.
There should be consequences
Yeah.
for sure for some of
Right now, there are
these.
no consequences. Oh, Equifax lost all our credit card numbers. Okay, black eye on Equifax. They don't give. There's no
Yeah,
repercussions.
yeah,
Somebody should be arrested. Somebody should. Then they will get their act together, right? So more on the side when you fuck up, things break.
yeah.
Should be, there's no responsibility, no accountability.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a need for some kinds of oversight. That's where I get scared of enshrining monopolies too, though, because then it becomes such a huge overhead to do. How do we pull these things together in the right way? You know what I also hate about all this is like it points to a bullish case for crypto. And that just annoys me.
Yeah.
Full stop, because there's been so much snake oil in that world that it's hard to take it seriously. But there are glimmers of hope in that world where there is a distributed trust protocol that allows us to build these kinds of systems that have effectively decentralized authority and trust.
Like for example, I think in Europe they have legislation going on where if you're doing machine learning, like you're running a business and you're employing machine learning, and let's say your machine learning is deployed in some situation where you can harm humans, something goes wrong. In the court of law, you cannot say, well, machines figured it out. You cannot.
Yeah.
You got your neck is on the line. You're like, you have to explain to us how did this happen. I don't know, machines somehow there's a neural net and it just that's not going to hold, right?
Yeah, well, and that's the lack of consequences thing, and we've seen this mistake made a whole bunch of times, especially with facial recognition technology and underrepresented people. And
And medical, you
yeah,
under a knife, right? And it's all machine learning neural nets, and they cut you up, and they're like, okay, well, what can you
and
do?
they've never seen a person of color before in their whole data set, so you get implicitly racist machines effectively. And
Yeah,
yeah, and the backtracking of a lot of this, like how did it work, is a worthy thing for us to be pursuing as far as understanding, because frankly we don't yet. We just know we throw a lot of data at it and we get racist bots out the other side. That's been applied to some useful use cases, but there have been many examples of how harmful this can also be. And the ethics side, as well demonstrated by Google themselves in the last few months, has been for want. They are dropping the ball on this in a massive way, and they're frankly probably setting us all back in the process.
yeah.
This isn't something we're going to get right eventually by being secretive. This is something
I
that's going to
think
be ugly and messy.
looks like in Europe they're trying to apply some brakes to say,
Yeah,
okay, yeah, this is fantastic, but what about the ugly side?
yeah,
Therefore, cease and desist.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's worth. I think it's worth us doing, especially on the auto moderation. But like even simple things like phones unlocking for diverse faces. Like this is an inclusivity thing as well. Tricky ass questions. And what I hate is when people are pretending they have all the answers for this stuff, because I feel like some of this tech is absolutely just so new that there should be some breaks on its application. As we've seen with Facebook, when we don't have any regulation, things can get right out of hand. They've effectively, monetized selling hostile foreign governments private data and
Mhm.
manipulated elections along the way, which is not an opinion. These are facts
Yeah.
that are verifiable, and there's a lot of problems with that, to say the least. And we see it in our families and our friends today. Like everyone has that weird uncle who has been radicalized by what they've seen online. And this was the last thing any of us expected building these
Mhm.
systems. Like the whole promise was it was going to democratize
Yeah,
information, and therefore, everyone was going to be more educated. And what we found was we created crazy amplifying propaganda machines.
yeah, and then you all of a sudden you get your message from your aunt or somebody saying, "Did you know that Katy Perry's drinking children's blood?" Well,
Yeah, it's like, what?
what, what
Wait,
is this?
where'd you read that? And why did you think it was real?
Yeah, like what? Yeah, it is
Yeah,
shocking. It is shocking. But
yeah. I'm overall optimistic. Honestly, I think the growing pains are fairly normal for things, and I do think that in general, a lot of like kind of sort of more fringe elements have been amplified, but that also like has swung back the realization that things that we used to say are shouldn't be necessary, like it shouldn't be necessary to have a code of conduct. Well, yeah, it shouldn't be, but it fucking is necessary.
yeah,
So we're gonna have one. And like it shouldn't be necessary to moderate speech. Well, yeah, it shouldn't, but hey, we had 2 world wars about it, so maybe it's time we did. And it's not even hard. Like it's very, they teach this stuff in elementary schools in Canada. I don't. It surprises me when so many tech CEOs don't get this one, but like hate speech directed to identifiable groups is not legitimate, and it's illegal, and it's a slippery slope for a reason, and we
and
don't
it's not.
endorse it.
And excuse me, it's not cancel culture, please.
No, yeah, that's just
Stop that
nonsense.
bullshit. Just
Yeah. Well, yeah, and yeah, some people should be canceled.
yeah,
Like, there's quite a
definitely.
few.
Yeah,
At any rate. Yeah, I saw a good takedown of that one by a cultural anthropologist who was like, we can't even agree on a definition of culture, so it's hard to cancel something we can't define. And it's pretty well written, and I agree. I think just more to the straight point, though, it's like, what voices do we amplify and how much we amplify them? Like, some views are illegitimate and don't deserve a platform, and that's okay to say that. But yeah,
hate,
tough one.
hate speech. No,
Yeah,
no.
full stop.
Oh,
Full stop.
yeah,
Yeah, don't pass go. That's a jail term if you're lucky. And I think yeah, the fact that we let it get this far is pretty wild. But yeah, anyways.
but let's maybe quickly let me pick your brain on one thing that I find it's very what's the word? Again, difficult to not only explain but to stick. There's a difference between incremental and iterative.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
brain tease, huh?
It is and it isn't. I mean, like we can. It comes back to that running versus walking. Deliberately. I think we want to build on our last successes, and we don't want to like say that adding lines of code was successful. Like the outcome wasn't that we're adding complexity or we're adding stuff. The outcome was that we moved the ball forward in some meaningful way, and we're building a path one stone at a time. And to me, that's um, that's more about what you want to be trying to strive for, as opposed to just like raw iterations. And you want to build a bigger and better picture every time. Bring into focus the thing that you're looking for, and build on the small wins and have small wins. Like any commit really is a push in the right direction. Doesn't matter if it's adding or removing lines.
Yeah,
And
but it's this activity of revisiting or changing something you've already changed that is
yeah,
sometimes becoming like, why are you doing that? I thought you finished that.
yeah. And
Mhm.
this is the knowing when to throw away thing, and when to just be happy with what you've got. And it's definitely more art than science, I think. Sometimes there's also an intuitiveness in here, like where you might have a hunch, and you want to take that hunch and do a prototype that's actually a prototype. Like you might throw it away for real, and you'll get secretive about it because if other people see it, that might nominate that as the actual direction. And
But
yeah,
the way I sometimes see it and explain it, it's the difference between having a very, let's say, have a very pixelated image, and now you're doing Fibonacci, you're circling over, and with each circle, you're making it more and more always,
yeah,
right? Until you get to a point like, okay, this is 4K. I like this. As opposed to incremental will be start from the upper left hand corner, you have your 4K little square, and then you keep adding them until you. So that's one way I look at it, right?
it's like a shitty drawing that gets better with every
Yeah,
iteration, right? Like you keep like finding more detail and
like the
bringing
owl in
out.
your right.
Yeah, yeah, got to draw the owl. That I have actually on my wall to remind myself to explain how I get to places, because I do this too. I'll leap to a conclusion and not I won't explain the context of what I'm like. I'll talk to my team and I'll be like, no, 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 we got to do it this way. And that's good for me to know and do. But if they don't understand how I arrived there, then and don't have the full context, then they're liable to think I'm either a dictator with no good,
Yeah,
ideas.
and that's why now we're starting to kind of recognize this metaphor with software architecture may not be the best because I think it's more like or urban planning.
Have you read Stuart Brand's How Buildings Learn?
No.
Oh, you would love this book. So this book, so it does bring back architecture. So I felt this way a little bit too, because buildings are so different than like if I want to add a bathroom, it's and copy and paste it. It's not as dramatic as uh, as building is, but he does a really good job talking about a house over a long period of time, and a building has different layers. And when you think about we think about architecture and buildings as these static things that last for a long time, and they kind of are, but if you're able to speed up time and look at a building, 100-year-old building, and you just press fast forward and say you put 100 years into 1 minute, you'd see it change a lot. You'd see the exterior change, you'd see the interior change, you'd see them like rip stuff out and put stuff in. So through the lens of like the fullness of time, a building sheds layers and adds them and moves itself around and reconfigures itself. So the metaphor can work if you're able to change time. And that's the other weird thing about programming, is that we get to change time all the time. Like we get to decide, how long we spend on stuff. So like we can move with different speeds. It's a
Right.
good book. Anyways, it digs into this and it talks about
I'll
how
look
like
for it. Yeah.
the
That,
furnishings count and the landscaping counts, like all that counts and all that does constantly change.
yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm finding it very, very tough sell, not only sell in sense, even from myself, is Yagni. And because we all, I think,
This is my personal like I it's my first gut thing to say to people. It's like, you're not going to need that. Like
yeah,
instead of starting with I need this thing, start with the what is I'm trying to do. And,
right. Because we have, I discovered that a lot of us have implicitly this what I call finality premise. So I just have a final state in my mind, and I'm just rushing toward it, right? And naturally, I have all these just flood of ideas. Like, oh yeah, and then this and that, and then somebody goes, says, "But you aren't going to need it, right?" I'm like, I know, but I know how to do it now. So why don't I just? And this is
I
this.
the Ruby community came so close to enshrining this, and the JavaScript community just threw it right back out again. It's just like, but it came so we. I can remember when like the first like meteor of the Ruby thing was programmers can be happy. That was such a different viewpoint at that time. What do you mean programmers can be happy? Who cares about the programmers? It's like, wait a minute, I'm a programmer. That sounds like a good thing. And then like they also, I think it was the GitHub guys were the ones that like really pushed the Agni narrative for a bit. And I really took that one to heart and embraced it and apply it to every single project I'm on. I don't see very many programmers doing that though. This is not normal at all. They,
I'm doing a lot of leading teams in doing mob programming, right? And it's really fascinating. And first thing you notice is like Yagni goes out of the door. As soon as it, because you have this mob and they're talking. As soon as this, yeah, and by the way, now we can add this. I'm like, why? Right now we're
yeah.
still all this little thing. Why don't we just do it? I know, but like, look, this is the opportunity now. We're under the hood.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's every time, like my favorite one is auth. Because I see this one very commonly in serverless architectures. People be like, oh, I need Cognito. And I'd be like, what? Why do you need Cognito? And they're like, well, I need to be able to sign in with every service. You're like, but do you really, or do you just need to sign in with one? Well, yeah, we just need to sign in with Google, but we might need to be able to sign with all these other services. And it's like, okay, well, a Google OAuth handler is literally 25 lines of code, whereas configuring Cognito is multiple days of your time, and you'll get it wrong for sure, at least once or twice. So
And,
like, that's a horrible trade-off. You just took multiple days to do something
yeah,
you could do in 15 minutes
I mean,
because of maybe I'll need all these other things. What a
and
horrible trade-off.
I can tell you war stories from the Ruby community with the device jam, where
Oh yeah, yeah,
will shoot
yeah, yeah,
themselves in the foot and paint themselves in a corner, and then it's months of debugging and troubleshooting. Like, what the? And nothing works.
yeah. And it's for a use case you don't yet have,
Yeah,
and that's the worst part of that whole thing because it's like, oh my God, we're spinning our tires for what? And like,
yeah.
you know,
And then another thing I can kind of share with you, which is a tough sell, something I call approximation before precision. And that is also a very difficult thing to instill because as soon as we start working, people jump in with super precise work and they tighten the screws. And I'm like, guys, why don't we first establish like a walking skeleton, just like tracing board?
yeah,
And nobody's like, no, 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 I know exactly. Like, and then later on, when you assemble nothing fits together, right? And now you've
yeah,
learned,
totally.
and that is a tough. I don't know why this discipline is so hard to explain and for people to adopt. We all rush towards like, I know exactly how to nail this sucker, right? And
Yeah, I see this one very often too. I showed a disturbing chunk of code to one of our programmers recently on this topic. So the open core begin as a project we have called Architect, and Architect generates cloud formation at the end of the day. And as a part of Architect, I designed a configuration language that was going to be really terse. We ended up capitulating and supporting YAML, JSON, and TOML because people ask for it, but we still have our own config language, which people will say is a bad idea, but there are good reasons to do this. And we did it, and the first version of it was I want to say it was like 100 lines of regular expressions. It was terrible, but it worked for 3 years. And then eventually I had a break where I took a week off and I wrote a lexer and parser. And guess what? All the tests passed and we swapped it over and nobody noticed. So now I did it right, but I've had years where it was unequivocally wrong in every way. We relied on regular expressions. We were splitting the file up using JavaScript and running regular, like we were not doing parsing the way you're supposed to do parsing. And you know who cared? Nobody. Nobody. And that
that's
first iteration was good enough for a long time.
that's the make it work.
Make it right. Make it fast. That's the
In my case, fake it.
yeah.
Everything's hard coded, just fake, fake, fake. Just everything passes. Okay. Then you make it work. Then, if need be, you make it right. And maybe if there's a bottleneck, make it fast.
Yeah.
But you have to see the bottleneck.
I agree completely. Yeah. And this can happen over years,
Yeah.
depending on how committed you are to the thing that you're building. And And yeah, no one's going to be bummed out about that early iteration getting out sooner. And when you do run into the wall, which you might not, then it's a great time to revisit that. You've had good compounding for your investment of time, and when you do hit that weird, the wall is never the one you think you're going to hit. If you
Yeah.
plan a particular wall, you go to avoid that wall, not deal with it.
Yeah. And sometimes, as they say, it's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, high class problems. That's what I call them. You want those problems
You want
from
them.
the time you bought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you any longer. It's dinner time, right?
Yeah. I could keep yeah, it is. I could keep going for hours. I love chatting with you about this stuff. And
We can do another chat, another session when you have some time. This is really good.
yeah.
And again, I think we should put our heads together and start thinking about breakthroughs. We got to make a breakthrough. You already are making a breakthrough with Begin, right? But we can always push it further.
Well, there's a philosophical alignment here that I want this meme in people's heads because I feel like the opposite is true right now. And there's a lot of people that are like they have solutions without problems. And I want to get them back to where the problem is before we pick our solutions. And it was this is nothing to do with anything other than it's personal. Like I want all of us to be better, and I
Yeah.
feel like it's there for the taking. We have such
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing tools now, and it is an attitude adjustment a little bit.
Yeah. And we have the brain power, like guys like you and the other guys. I'll send you a link. Um, I think we can tackle. First thing we can start tackling is accidental complexity. Why do we have such a complex attack surface? Why do we need this? Is it really needed? Maybe we can just simplify it and have a nice little smooth surface to attack, and everything works from there. And then next thing I would attack is code as text. Why do we need to write text? Why can't we just directly manipulate whatever it is, right? I don't know.
I think we're getting very dangerously close to a scratchy world, like Lego bricks that fit into each other. The AWS stuff is not there from a complexity standpoint, but like if you squint, you're like I can build a queue right now that can pump like tens of thousands of requests per second. I didn't have that before.
I
And
know.
defining that queue is like a couple lines of code now. Like we've got these primitives.
Yeah, but think about, I think we are at the very precipice, the verge of the age of edge computing, and we will be moving into edge
Totally.
computing, right? And so with that, like right now, okay, so here's my thesis. So our entire technology, I think, is started with the Gutenberg's printing press and mass production and industrial age and all that. And here we
Yep.
are today, and we are just basically riding on fumes of that. We're just running on fumes because what are we doing? What is Gutenberg Press? It is a rectangular flat surface with some symbols on it. This is our entire heritage, our entire civilization. Today, you and I are looking at the flat surface. We're looking at some symbols. This is bullshit because this is not who we are. We are way more capable beings than limit yourself to a tiny little glassy rectangular surface. What I'm saying is we are spatial beings. We need to have those programmable objects flying in the air. We manipulate them. We program them, like in 3D. In 3D. We need
I
to have,
totally think so too, though. Like we are trapped by our metaphors in a bunch of ways that we don't. I think it goes back farther than I think it's the loom. Like you go back to textile weaving, and
yeah,
that's like early compute in a lot of ways. If you squint at it, and like early written like clay tablets, not that far off from what we're doing today. Like,
yeah.
somebody's
Yeah.
writing some stuff down, and those are the rules.
I want to be able to, I want to be able to walk around, to touch things, to push them, to pull them, to shove them in your direction. And that's how we model
Yeah,
things and
yeah,
think. This is nothing. This is just really chicken shit in my mind, right? And
yeah.
we can do it. And we have the technology even today. We have nano printing. You have IoT, Internet of Things. Why are we not using that? Why are we stuck in this like bullshit little JavaScript, type some words
I'm
and
totally with you. I think it's true. I think we are our own worst enemy as far as like inertia goes, because
wake
we've
up.
always done it that way.
Right.
Like,
Guys, wake up. And I'm looking
yeah.
at your generation, like, come on, guys, start kicking ass. Now is the time. Anyway, we are prisoners here in this isolation. I mean, let's put the brain power together, breakthrough. We can do it.
I feel like some stuff is close and some stuff's far for this. Like I tried uh that Oculus again fairly recently. They sent me one for like I tried one I don't know, a long time ago, before Facebook, a long time ago, and it made me sick. So I was like, all right, this is too early. And then Amazon sent me one for reInvent. I was like, oh, I don't know about this. And I went to a conference talk in my office, but in neon disco, and it was pretty real. It was like pretty good, and like within the first 10 minutes, I was like, holy shit, this is like going to change everything when this is like just a little bit better. It's still like I had to install like my own weird operating system app to get it working, and I had to like flash a thing, and like it was still like too programmery. It's not out of the box yet, but like it's getting there. It's getting to the point where like a 10-year-old kid will probably be in a room with people in rooms all over the world doing some kind of collaborating at some point. It's
Solve,
like this close, but
solve
it's
the problem.
still
I
yeah.
feel some problems cannot be solved in a two-dimensional surface. We just
Oh,
can't
totally.
tackle them, right? And so we leave them alone, and we are selling ourselves short,
And
right?
and text is the most lo-fi.
Yeah,
Like
bandwidth.
we see it in Slack all day. Two developers getting snippy with each other, getting snippy with each other. Okay, guys, let's go into a Zoom room, and then suddenly everyone's friends. And it's like all we needed was to like talk face to face for like 30 seconds, and then
And they're
all of a
clear.
sudden,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's because the bandwidth is so low
Yeah.
on
Oh, yeah.
text, and people immediately assume the worst thing, and
Yeah.
it spirals.
No, so we need
Yeah.
to liberate ourselves from this shitty prison.
Yeah,
And
well, I mean, when you take this few steps further and thinking like, are we going to plug into the matrix proper? Like, that's pretty exciting because then some real weird shit's going to happen.
yeah, of course. Okay, awesome.
Okay, man. Well, it was great catching up, Alex. And
Great.
yeah, just keep
Well,
me in your queue for troublemakers.
I'll maybe send you the link to our Discord,
Yeah,
and
nice.
then we can continue, and then we'll have another session for sure.
Sweet. All right, man. Well,
Excellent.
hopefully we can see each other face to face in
Yeah.
Vancouver one of these days.
When you're in Vancouver, I'm here on Mount Pleasant.
Yeah, I should be back actually. I don't know. It depends on how things go with the whole vaccination drive. But I'm supposed to go visit parents and stuff early summer. So
I don't think we'll get vaccinated before September. I doubt
I doubt it too. I doubt it severely based on their timelines, but who knows?
it. Anyway, thank
Anyways, have a good one, man.
you. Ciao. Bye.